The soft jazz, the laughter floating through the air, the clinking of crystal glasses, all were silenced in an instant by the sharp, brutal sound of a slap echoing through the elegant ballroom. My cheek burned with a stinging pain, a humiliation that seared deeper than the blow itself. I stumbled, falling helplessly onto the cold marble floor, my head striking the corner of a table amidst the stifled gasps of my coworkers and the looks of sadistic satisfaction from my husband's family. My mother-in-law's voice rose above the silence, her words not of defense or calm, but laced with a malice so cruel it chilled my bones. "Teach her a lesson so she learns," her voice hissed like venom. "What good is it for a woman to have so much talent? It only brings misfortune to her husband. She might be the brightest woman in the world, but at home you are nothing more than a wife. Today, only heaven can save you." In that abyss of pain and shame, I discreetly grabbed my cell phone, dialing a number I knew by heart, and whispered through my tears, "Gavin, please help me." And no, heaven did not save me. My brother did. All this tragedy had begun during the happiest moment of my life, barely 30 minutes earlier. That night, in the luxurious atmosphere of the Skyline Terrace in the heart of Chicago, I felt like the luckiest woman in the world. I, Ebony Wells, dressed in an emerald green silk gown my husband Damon had chosen for me, was the center of toasts and congratulations for my promotion to Director of Planning after 7 years of tireless dedication. I looked at Damon, at my in-laws, everyone smiling, and in my innocence, I believed my success was their pride as well. I thought 7 years as a submissive daughter-in-law, a wife devoted to building a perfect home, had finally earned me their recognition. How wrong I was. Terribly wrong. When my CEO praised me as a diamond in the rough and told Damon to value me, I saw no pride in my husband's eyes, only deep discomfort, a flame of jealousy and wounded ego burning with frightening intensity. He was drunk, his knuckles white around his glass, and after a poisonous whisper from his mother, he stood up and shattered my world. "So, you're brilliant, aren't you?" he growled, his voice loud enough to silence the room. "Now you're the boss. You feel powerful. The whole company applauds you, and I, your husband, am nothing but a zero to you." I pleaded with him to sit down, but he shoved my hand away violently. "I am sick of living in your shadow. Wherever I go, I hear people say that my wife is better than me. Do you know how humiliating that is?" The restaurant fell to a deathly silence, all eyes fixed on us, my face burning with shame as I searched his family's faces for help and found only cold, indifferent stares. Then came the deafening slap, the physical pain nothing compared to the agony tearing at my soul as he lunged at me again, and his mother sealed my fate with her venomous words. Taking advantage of the chaos, I stumbled to the bathroom, fell to my knees, and saw my pathetic reflection, my natural curls disheveled, my cheeks swollen and red against my dark skin, my lip bleeding, my expensive dress stained. 7 years of sacrifice for this. Trembling, I took out my phone and called the one person I knew could save me, Gavin. The mysterious brother named Gavin arrived not as a man, but as a force of nature, an aura of terrifying power that made Damon's family shrink back in their seats at the restaurant. He didn't raise his voice or his hand, but his presence alone commanded a fearful silence. He simply took my coat, helped me up, and led me away, his protective grip speaking volumes. He took me to a luxurious penthouse that felt like a fortress, a stark contrast to the gilded cage I had escaped. There, as I trembled on a sofa softer than I'd known, he listened to my fractured story, his face a mask of calm that barely contained a storm. "It's over, Ebony," his voice said, a deep, steady anchor in my chaos. "You're safe now. No one will ever hurt you again." But safety was a fragile concept, shattered again when an anonymous message flashed on the new phone he gave me. Damon is embezzling company funds. He's in deep with Montgomery. Embezzlement? Damon was an abuser, a coward, but this? I couldn't believe it, yet the message was there, a mysterious thread pulling me into a darker maze. Was it a trap? At that moment, the doorbell rang. Dr. Lowe, sent by Gavin to check my injuries. Her kindness was a balm, but her observation was a needle to my heart. I noticed you have some older bruises. It seems this is not the first time. She was right. The first time was a year after our wedding, a shove when he was drunk, followed by tearful apologies and my foolish forgiveness. The cycle repeated, each time worse, each time hidden behind my shame and my desperate cling to a fantasy of a perfect home. Silence is what feeds evil, Dr. Lowe said gently. The more you tolerate, the bolder the abuser becomes. Her words were a brutal awakening. My silence had given him power. The next morning, driven by a need to know the truth, I went to meet the anonymous sender at a cafe called the Daily Grind, not telling Gavin. An elegantly dressed woman but worry-consumed introduced herself as the wife of Director Montgomery, my company's biggest competitor. I am a victim too, she said, her voice heavy with bitterness. She laid out a horrible conspiracy. Her husband had used a shell company in Damon's name to launder money, conspired with Damon, dragged him into gambling to create enormous debts, then forced him to embezzle and steal company secrets to pay them off. The ultimate goal was to drive my company into bankruptcy, with Damon as the scapegoat. I have gathered enough evidence to report him, she said, pushing a dossier towards me, but I need your cooperation. You have access to the evidence of Damon's embezzlement. If we act together, we can put those two scoundrels in prison. She gave me 2 days to decide and left in a hurry. I was left alone, drained, the truth more terrible than I imagined. My life, my marriage, a piece in a dirty chess game. On the way home, Gavin called, his voice cold. You went to meet that woman, didn't you? Don't lie. I had you followed. Ebony, that was dangerous. Come home right now. Back at the penthouse, he was tense, his worry palpable. After making me eat, he finally spoke, his voice calmer but serious. Do you know why I worry so much about you? Because you're my sister, the only family I have left. He reminded me of our past more than 20 years ago in a group home after a drunk driver killed our parents. He was 10, I was 5, a skinny girl who took his hand and said, "Don't cry anymore. From now on, I will be your family." He protected me, taught me, and when I was adopted, he swore to become strong so no one could ever hurt me again. I fought in life. I did things you would probably never imagine, all for that promise, he said. When I asked if it was legal, he smiled slightly, a smile tinged with sadness. Mafia business? The line is very fine, sister. I just do what I consider right. I protect who I need to protect. He owned a security firm and other businesses, enough to have a voice in the city. 7 years ago, when you decided to marry Damon, I had him investigated. I knew he wasn't a good person, that his family was a nest of calculating vipers. But you are so happy, so in love. I didn't have the heart to destroy your dream. I was wrong. My biggest mistake was staying silent. He clenched his fists. I should have acted sooner. Ebony, forgive me. I shook my head, tears falling. No, it's not your fault. I was the stupid one. Gavin, what do I do now? He wiped my tears. Don't worry, I'm here. From now on, no one will ever hurt you again. We are going to play this game together, and I promise you this. Whoever made you shed a single tear, I will make them pay with a whole river. His words were not an empty promise. A storm named Gavin was about to unleash. After the disastrous party, Damon's family fell into a sepulchral silence, but it was only the calm before a more poisonous attack. 2 days later, my name, Ebony Wells, became a trending topic. Sensationalist headlines appeared. Adulterous real estate director swaps husband for mafia boss. The hidden truth behind the promotion party. Husband disciplines arrogant wife. painting me as an unfaithful, ambitious woman who used her money to humiliate her in-laws. Photos of Gavin and me, twisted to look illicit, were everywhere, with false witnesses adding invented comments. The media storm was fast and brutal, trying to turn me from victim to villain. Damon called, his voice triumphant. "Well then, are you enjoying the fame? Ebony, I warned you. You can't beat my family. Now you only have two options. Come back home, get on your knees and beg my mother for forgiveness, or stay there with your lover and wait for society to spit on you and the company to fire you." I called him a despicable scoundrel, but he just laughed. "I give you 1 day to think about it. Don't force me to use more drastic measures." I felt completely helpless, having underestimated their baseness. Gavin, silent by my side, scrolled through the articles, his face frozen. "They've crossed the line," he said, his voice dangerous. He called his assistant, Cyrus. "Investigate all accounts defaming Ebony. Find the IP addresses. Find out who is behind this. I give you half an hour. And bring the car around. We have work tonight." He turned to me, his gaze firm. "Don't worry, leave it all to me. Tonight, I'm taking you to see a very interesting play. It's called Belated Regret." That night, we drove to an alley near my old home. Gavin gave me a tablet linked to a camera on his shirt. "Stay here. You'll see everything." He and Cyrus entered the house silently, picking the lock. On the screen, I saw Damon's entire family in the living room, gloating over the articles. "You see, I told you so," Mrs. Sterling's strident voice rang. "A couple of articles and we leave her in the dirt," Damon said triumphantly. "I gave her a day to think about it. If she doesn't crawl back here tomorrow, she's going to find out what's what." At that moment, Gavin emerged from the darkness. No need to wait until tomorrow. The family spun around, startled, fear replacing their arrogance. How did you get in here?" Damon stammered. Gavin sat calmly, his gaze sweeping over them. "I heard you like playing with the media. You like inventing stories, staining the honor of others." He signaled to Cyrus, who opened a laptop, revealing their darkest secrets. Mrs. Sterling's gambling debts, Damon's $80,000 in online gambling losses with loan sharks hunting him, the sister-in-law's hidden scandals. "With a single click," Gavin said, "all this will be all over the internet with evidence. Let's see then who is left in the dirt." He leaned into Damon's ear, his whisper captured by the camera. "You dared to hit my sister. You dared to make her cry. No one who has done that has ever managed to sleep in peace again." He threw photos of unfriendly men on the table. "The loan sharks you owe money to are my subordinates. What do you think will happen if I tell them to come pay a courtesy visit tomorrow?" Damon collapsed to his knees, shaking. The family was silent, crushed. "Delete all those articles immediately, and prepare to go to court. My sister wants to play by the rules, and I'm going to respect that, but don't ever test my patience again." He left, leaving them in fear and despair. In the car, my heart racing, I felt immense satisfaction. Gavin's show of force had been implacable. "It's done. From now on, they won't dare do anything else. The rest is in your hands and the lawyers." The next morning, the defamatory articles vanished. Calm returned, but it was the calm before the legal battle. I started working with Attorney Hart, a brilliant lawyer Gavin recommended. She analyzed the evidence, medical reports, recordings, the dossier, and said we had a solid case for divorce, asset division, compensation, and even criminal liability for Damon. But she frowned at one point. "In Damon's bank statements, I've noticed several large transfers to a company called West Horizon LLC. Do you know this company?" I didn't. The name was foreign. "These transactions occurred regularly every month for the last 3 years. The total amount is almost $200,000. It doesn't look like a normal investment. I need to investigate more." A new secret, West Horizon LLC. What did it have to do with everything? Why would Damon transfer such a sum in secret? The name tormented me. I decided to investigate on my own before telling Gavin. My search yielded little. A small real estate company with a basic website, sole administrator John Pike, no apparent connection to Damon. But then Attorney Hart called with news. The court had sent summons and the first hearing was next week. She also mentioned a detail that froze my blood. West Horizon LLC was founded 3 years ago, just after Montgomery started his conspiracy, and its registered address matched an old office of Gavin's security firm. Coincidence? A terrifying theory formed. Did Gavin know everything? Was he pulling the strings? The first anonymous message, Montgomery's wife's timely appearance, Gavin's quick intimidation? Everything seemed staged. I couldn't doubt him, but the evidence stared at me. That night, Gavin returned with lilies. I asked him about West Horizon. He paused for a second, then smiled. The name sounds familiar. I think it's a small real estate company. Why do you ask? He was lying. That 1 second hesitation did not go unnoticed. I diverted the topic, but a wall of mistrust had risen. I couldn't sleep. I sneaked into his office, used the password, the date of his parents' death, and found a folder called Project Prometheus. It was a detailed plan for a total hostile takeover, not just to help me. It described steps from leaking Damon's gambling addiction to Montgomery's wife, to organizing our meeting, to using West Horizon to siphon money from my account to create evidence against Damon and protect my assets temporarily. The final step? After Montgomery's company went bankrupt, another company would acquire it at a bargain price, owned by Gavin. Everything was a plague erected by him. He had used my pain as a pawn. I was about to close the computer when I saw a file named The Final Secret. It was a dashcam video of an accident on a rainy night, a motorcycle crashing into a parked truck, the driver thrown, motionless. I recognized it, the accident that killed Gavin's parents. The camera focused on the truck driver, a man in panic who fled. The face was blurry but recognizable. Damon's father, Mr. Sterling. My world collapsed. The man I'd called Dad for 7 years was responsible for the tragedy that tormented Gavin. He had fled, leaving 2 innocent lives. The pieces fit. Project Prometheus, Gavin's revenge, was aimed at the entire Sterling family. I was trapped in a war. I had to discover more. The truck had a logo, Liberty Logistics. I called an old friend, got the number of the old traffic manager, Mr. Bridges. I called him, and after hesitation, he agreed to meet, but only with Gavin present. That night, I told Gavin. He stood motionless, his expression complex. "Where is he?" he asked hoarsely. We met Mr. Bridges in a small diner. He was an old man with a face furrowed by time. He told the story. Mr. Sterling was a rookie driver assigned an urgent delivery on a rainy night. But there is something no one knew. Before the truck left, someone tampered with the brakes. I saw a shadow, a tall, thin figure in a trench coat. I thought about reporting it, but forgot. The brakes were sabotaged. So the accident wasn't just Sterling's fault. The true mastermind was someone else, Mr. Bridges said, the one who sabotaged the brakes. He took out an old photo. It was a well-dressed young man next to a luxury car. The face was familiar. "Montgomery?" I whispered, horrified. "Exactly," Mr. Bridges nodded. Later, I found out he and young Gavin's family had some old feud. He set the trap, caused the accident to hurt them, and pinned the blame on Sterling. Sterling was a pawn, a scapegoat. The truth was even more terrible. Montgomery was the murderer of Gavin's family. Gavin's revenge had been aimed at the wrong target. Leaving the diner, we were silent. "I was wrong," Gavin finally said, his voice broken. "I let hate blind me. I almost destroyed an innocent man. Montgomery. He's going to pay." I urged him to let the law handle it, but he laughed bitterly. "Where was the law when my parents died? Where was it when your husband beat you? Ebony, you are too naive. There are people who can only be punished with fists." At that moment, Cyrus called. Montgomery wanted to meet urgently at the Onyx Lounge, a nightclub. Gavin decided to go, despite my fears it was a trap. That night, I followed him secretly. I watched from across the street, an hour passing slowly until I heard an argument, breaking glass, and a deafening gunshot. I froze, then ran across the street, shoving through panicked people to the second floor. I saw Gavin holding his bleeding arm, Montgomery wielding a gun, his face contorted with madness. "Who do you think you are to mess with me? You and that Ebony are all going to die." He aimed at Gavin. I screamed, but another shot rang out, and Montgomery fell, struck from behind by Cyrus with a chair. Plain-clothed police surged in and controlling the situation. Gavin had alerted them, prepared an ambush. I ran to him. "I'm fine, it's just a scratch," he said, pale but serene. Montgomery was led away in handcuffs. The final villain had fallen, but it left a strange emptiness. Montgomery's arrest revealed the heinous crime, but it also meant Gavin's acquisition plan had failed, and we were now crucial witnesses in a homicide case while guarding a 20-year-old secret. The next day, at the hospital, police questioned us. Montgomery confessed to the accident, money laundering, attempted murder, but when asked the motive for the feud with Gavin's family, he smiled enigmatically. "Feud? You would never understand. Go ask my good brother." That cryptic phrase echoed in our minds. Who was the good brother? What was the true feud? While the investigation continued, my divorce hearing proceeded. The Sterling family, knowing Montgomery was arrested and the conspiracy exposed, entered defeated. Mr. Sterling seemed aged, Mrs. Sterling silent. Damon stood before me, unable to look me in the eye. "Ebony, I agree to the divorce. I accept all your conditions. I just ask you to forgive my father. He is not a bad person. He is also a victim." I laughed with disdain. A man who flees after a fatal accident? A husband who allows his family to defame his wife? That's a victim? Damon's face contracted with anguish. "It's not what you think. There are things you don't know. The fault lies with my father, yes, but it is also a matter of destiny." His words planted a new doubt, but I was too tired. The process was fast. I got custody of our son, the majority of assets, and compensation. My marriage was over. I couldn't live in uncertainty. We had to find the answer to Montgomery's words. Using his contacts, Gavin found a name. Felix, a restaurant chain owner and Montgomery's business partner, who had a special relationship with someone I'd never imagine. Attorney Graves, my lawyer. I was stunned. Impossible. She helped me. She's a good person. "Good or not, we have to check," Gavin said. "Her appearance was too timely. She has met with Felix in secret." I refused to believe and went to her office unannounced. When I showed her the photo, her face changed. She sighed. "I knew sooner or later you would find out. Sit down, Ebony. There are things you need to know." She revealed that she and Montgomery were cousins. Their fathers were brothers, but Montgomery's father had conspired against her mother over inheritance, driving her to ruin and death. Since I was little, I have lived with this hatred. My only goal was to make the Montgomery family pay. I became a lawyer, gathered evidence, but he was too cunning. When I learned of your story, your connection to Damon's family and Montgomery, I knew it was my opportunity. I approached you on purpose. I helped you, but I was using you as a pawn in my revenge to take down Montgomery using your hand and your brother's. I said, paralyzed, feeling another betrayal. "I'm sorry, Ebony," she said with remorse, "but now I will tell you the final secret, the true reason for the feud." She took out an old dossier. "My mother left this. She discovered the accident wasn't caused directly by Montgomery. He only sabotaged the brakes. The true mastermind, the one who gave the order, is the authentic demon." She opened it to a black and white portrait of a man I'd seen in Gavin's family album. He is Montgomery's father, and he was also the sworn brother whom Gavin's father trusted blindly. But the most terrible thing isn't that betrayal. She turned to another page, an old birth certificate. Montgomery's mother and Gavin's mother were sisters. I felt the air leave my lungs. Sisters. So Gavin and Montgomery were cousins. Exactly, she nodded. The feud began in the previous generation. Montgomery's father, out of envy for Gavin's father's success and desiring the woman they both loved, Gavin's mother, planned the murder of his own brother-in-law. He used his son, Montgomery, turning him into his tool to kill. A family tragedy, a vicious cycle of hate and deceit extending through generations. Just then, as if destiny added a final cruel irony, my cousin Matteo returned from abroad with an old family diary. It revealed a third generation of tragedy. Our grandmothers, mine and Gavin's, had been rivals for the love of the same man, a story of betrayal ending in suicide. Our families were enemies long before we were born, and in the diary was the last, most shocking secret, a birthmark. A small crescent moon behind the right ear, a distinctive trait of our lineage, a mark my adoptive mother didn't have, but I did. I was the true biological granddaughter. My mother, the woman I thought had adopted me, had been switched at birth. My true mother, the legitimate heiress, had been hidden. The mastermind behind everything, behind the kidnapping of my mother, was Montgomery's father, so he could control our family's immense fortune. Everything clicked in an instant of blinding clarity. I wasn't just a piece on the board. I was the origin of everything. The prize, the reason the hate had begun, the stolen childs whose inheritance had unleashed a blood war lasting almost a century. My entire life had been a lie built on the foundations of someone else's greed. The revelation was a seismic shock that rendered me utterly motionless. The din of the city beyond the office windows faded into a distant hum, replaced by the deafening roar of my own blood in my ears. My hands, resting on the cool wood of Attorney Graves' desk, trembled violently. I, Ebony Wells, a woman who had defined herself by her career, her disastrous marriage, and her survival, was now an unrecognizable entity. The very bedrock of my identity, the loving, adoptive parents I had buried years ago, the childhood I remembered, the sense of being a solitary soul grafted onto a family by chance, all of it was a meticulously crafted fiction. I wasn't an orphaned charity case. I was a stolen heiress, the linchpin in a multi-generational conspiracy of avarice, so vast it had consumed lives for nearly 100 years. The birthmark behind my ear, a quirk I'd never thought significant, now felt like a brand, a sigil of a legacy written in blood. Gavin, sitting beside me, was a statue carved from pure, cold fury. His jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscle leaping beneath his skin. The revelation that Montgomery was his cousin, that the man he had just helped put in handcuffs was the offspring of the same monstrous bloodline that had orchestrated his parents' murder, added a new, horrifying layer to his grief. His quest for vengeance, which he thought had been misdirected at the Sterlings, was now revealed to be part of a much larger, much more poisonous tree. He had been hunting a branch, while the rotten roots remained buried. "My mother," he finally said, his voice a gravelly whisper that seemed to scrape its way out of his throat. Attorney Graves nodded solemnly, pushing the old birth certificate toward him. The names were there, undeniable. 2 sisters, one who became Gavin's gentle, doomed mother, the other who married the devil and bore Montgomery. The family rift had been so deep, so catastrophic, that it had been erased from memory, a wound cauterized by shame and hatred. "The diary," I managed to say, my own voice sounding foreign. "What else does it say? Where is my real mother?" Matteo, my cousin, who had been sitting quietly, a conduit of this devastating history, leaned forward. His eyes, which held a familiar kindness, were heavy with sorrow. "Her name was Alara," he said softly. "Alara Vance." Vance, my CEO's name. A fresh wave of dizziness hit me. Coincidence was a dead concept. She was hidden away after the switch, declared mentally unstable by Montgomery's father to secure control of the Vance family trust, a trust you are the rightful heir to. She died, Ebony, about 10 years ago, in a private care facility. The records were falsified. It was made to look like a lifelong illness, but our grandmother's diary hints it may not have been natural. The room seemed to tilt. Not only had I been stolen, but the woman who gave me birth was likely murdered to seal the secret. My success at the Vance Company, the paternal pride of my CEO, now took on a grotesque, ironic hue. Had some deep, unknowing recognition drawn to me, or was it another layer of the trap? The pieces of the hellish puzzle now formed a complete, monstrous picture. Montgomery's father, envious of his sworn brother's fortune and in love with his brother's wife, orchestrated a double genocide. He had the brother, Gavin's father, killed in the accident. He kidnapped the sister's child, me, to manipulate the Vance fortune. He married the other sister, Gavin's aunt, to cement his position, and raised a son, Montgomery, in his own vindictive image. The feud wasn't just business or a crime of passion. It was a systemic annihilation of a rival bloodline for complete dominion. My marriage to Damon Sterling was likely not even chance, with Mr. Sterling's cowardly flight making him permanently indebted and controllable. Forcing his son to marry the hidden heiress could have been a move to keep all the pawns, the Sterlings, the Vance legacy, and the Montgomery ambition, under one hideous roof. I was the ultimate prize, sleeping beside a man who despised me, utterly ignorant that my very existence was the reason for the prison I lived in. Gavin stood up abruptly, the chair scraping harshly against the floor. The calm, calculating strategist was gone, replaced by a man vibrating with primal rage. "Where is he?" he demanded, not of Attorney Graves or Mateo, but of the universe itself. Montgomery's father. Is he still alive? Attorney Graves shook her head. He died 5 years ago, a stroke. He never faced a day of justice. A bitter, mirthless laugh escaped Gavin. Of course not. The architect dies in his bed, leaving his son to clean up the mess with more murder, and I've been tidying up the edges of his masterpiece. He turned his burning gaze to me. The fury in it softened, just for a fraction, into an agony of shared loss. We were both born into his script, Ebony, but it ends now. The script is ours to burn. The following weeks were a whirlwind of grim resolution and legal maneuvering conducted in a state of surreal detachment. The criminal case against Montgomery was rock solid, augmented by the new evidence of historical homicide. He was denied bail, his empire crumbling as authorities peeled back the layers of his shell companies, with West Horizon LLC now a key piece of evidence linking him to both the old accident and the recent financial conspiracy. Damon, in a plea deal to avoid being the sole fall guy for the embezzlement scheme, turned over everything he had on Montgomery, confirming the sinister orchestration behind our marriage. He was a broken, pathetic figure, sentenced to a term that felt both too harsh for the pawn he was and too lenient for the pain he inflicted. His family, stripped of their social standing and facing financial ruin from the litigation, retreated into obscurity, their malice finally neutralized by a force greater than their petty cruelty. But the true battle was just beginning, the quiet, monumental one for identity and legacy. With Mateo's testimony and the diary, we launched a legal petition to overturn my adoption records and establish my true parentage as Alara Vance. The process was like an archaeological dig into a tragic past, unearthing documents buried by corruption and time. CEO Mr. Vance, when I finally sat before him in his office, not as an employee but as a potential relative, was devastated. The man who toasted my brilliance was now weeping for a sister he never knew he had, for a niece who had been right under his nose. DNA testing confirmed it. He was my uncle. The Vance Family Trust, a substantial fortune that had been under the stealthy control of Montgomery's family for decades, was now in chaotic limbo. The battle for its control would be a protracted war in civil court, but for the first time, it would be fought with the rightful heir in the open. Through it all, Gavin was my constant, my fortress. But the fury that had sustained him was now a cold, lingering ember. Learning the full scope of the betrayal had changed him. The man who spoke of mafia business and street justice now seemed to understand that the true destruction of this enemy required a different kind of dismantling, a legal, financial, and historical annihilation that would erase the Montgomery name from power forever. He worked tirelessly with Attorney Graves and a new team of trust lawyers, his network of contacts now used to gather evidence rather than to intimidate. One evening, in the penthouse that had become our war room and sanctuary, he looked at me across a cable strewn with documents. "He took my parents," Gavin said quietly, staring at a photo of Montgomery's father. "He stole your mother and your life. But he couldn't steal your mind, Ebony, or your strength. That's what undid them all. Not my threats, but your refusal to stay on your knees." He was giving me the credit, but I knew the truth. It was our combination, his unyielding power and my quiet resilience, that had formed the hammer to shatter the old script. The media, once a tool used to vilify me, now circled the story of the decade, the kidnapped heiress, the decades-old murder conspiracy, the fall of a real estate mogul. I gave one carefully controlled interview, not for fame, but to own the narrative, to look into the camera and state plainly that the cycle of secrecy and victimization was over. I saw my own face on screens, no longer the bruised woman fleeing a party, but a woman of quiet authority, reclaiming a story that was never hers to bear. In the midst of this tumult, I found small, profound moments of reclamation. I visited the grave of Alara Vance, my mother. It was an unmarked plot in a neglected corner of a cemetery. I had a proper headstone placed there, one that bore her true name and the words, "Beloved Mother, finally remembered." I brought white lilies. Sitting there on the grass, I didn't feel the overwhelming connection of a child raised by a mother. That love belonged to the woman who had adopted me. Instead, I felt a deep, sorrowful solidarity with a fellow victim, a woman robbed of her child and her life. I promised her I would live fully, something she was never allowed to do. Months bled into a year. The criminal trials concluded. Montgomery was convicted on a raft of charges, including conspiracy to commit murder for the death of my mother, Alara. He would die in prison. The civil case over the Vance Trust was settled in my favor, a complex arrangement that left me with significant wealth and control, which I immediately began using to establish a foundation in my mother's name for victims of domestic violence and financial coercion. It felt like the only way to spin the vile inheritance into something clean and good. Gavin and I bought a smaller, sun-filled loft overlooking the lake, a place with no history, only future. The penthouse had served its purpose as a bunker, but we needed a home. One evening, as we stood on the balcony watching the lights glitter on the water, the weight of the past year finally settled into a bearable ache. "You know," Gavin said, his arm around my shoulders, the solid, reliable presence that had been my constant since childhood, "for most of my life, I thought my purpose was vengeance, to be the storm that wiped out the people who hurt mine." He paused, looking down at me. "But you were my purpose, Ebony, keeping you safe, helping you find your truth. That's the only thing that ever mattered. The rest was just noise." I leaned my head against his shoulder, the solid, reliable presence that had been my constant since childhood. "You saved me, Gavin, not just from Damon, but from living a lie. Now," I said, taking a deep breath of the cool night air, "we get to live our own truth, whatever that is." The story of Ebony Wells, the brilliant director, the abused wife, the secret heiress, could have ended with the revelation. It could have been a finale. But as I looked out at the vast, dark expanse of the lake and the resilient city beyond, I understood that the most interesting stories aren't about the shocking secrets uncovered, but about what is built in the crater left after the explosion. The mystery was solved, the villains were vanquished, the fortune was secured, yet the real narrative was just beginning. The story of a woman, once defined by the trap set for her, now free to define herself. It was the story of a brother and sister, bound not just by shared trauma, but by a chosen loyalty deeper than any blood feud. It was about the quiet, daily act of constructing a life not as a reaction to pain, but as a proclamation of peace. The ghosts were not gone, they likely never would be, but they no longer held the pen. For the first time in my life, and Gavin's, the next page was blissfully, terrifyingly, beautifully blank. The blank page, as it turned out, was both a luxury and a daunting challenge. For months, every action had been a reaction, to a slap, to a headline, to a newly unearthed secret. Now, with the legal battles subsiding into a low hum of ongoing estate management and the public's voracious appetite for our story moving on to the next spectacle, the silence was deafening. I would sometimes catch myself standing in the middle of our new loft, the morning sun painting geometric shapes on the polished concrete floor, feeling a strange vertigo. There was no immediate threat to assess, no evidence to gather, no performance of strength to maintain. There was only the quiet and myself. Gavin, too, seemed to be navigating this new calm like a sailor unaccustomed to still waters. His security firm was legitimate and thriving, but the edge of danger that had once defined his work, the shadowy dealings he'd alluded to, had been deliberately blunted. He'd restructured, focusing on corporate cybersecurity and high-end executive protection, leaving the grittier, more ambiguous operations behind. The storm doesn't need to rage all the time, he told me one evening as he meticulously cleaned a collection of vintage watches, a new, peaceful hobby. Sometimes it's enough to know it can be summoned. I understood. His power was now a dormant volcano, its potency derived from its potential, not its constant eruption. We were both learning to be people, not just protagonists in a survival epic. My reclamation of the Vance legacy was less about the money and more about the narrative. With my uncle's blessing and full cooperation, I immersed myself in the company not as a director of planning, but as a principal shareholder with a deeply personal mission. I initiated an internal audit, not to find malfeasance, but to identify the cultural ghosts of the Montgomery influence, the cutthroat practices, the toxic rivalries that had been fostered over decades. I met with department heads, not in the boardroom, but over coffee, listening to their hopes for the company. I spoke openly about the need for a culture that valued integrity over blind ambition, collaboration over internal sabotage. Some viewed me with skepticism, a figure of tabloid drama now playing at corporate reform. But many more, especially the women and younger employees, saw something else. A survivor who had used her voice to topple a corrupt system and was now trying to build a better one in its place. It was slow, often frustrating work, a far cry from the dramatic courtroom revelations, but it felt profoundly real. I was no longer just planning buildings, I was attempting to shape an ecosystem. This new phase of life also brought with it a curious, unanticipated challenge, navigating the world of genuine friendship. For 7 years, my social circle had been dictated by Damon and his family, a network of superficial connections and veiled competitions. My old friends from before the marriage had faded away, casualties of my all-consuming effort to fit into the Sterling mold. Now I found myself tentatively reaching out. There was Lorna, a fiercely intelligent graphic designer I'd known in college, who greeted my hesitant lunch invitation with a hug so tight it squeezed the air from my lungs. "You vanished into that gilded cage," she said, her eyes sharp with concern, not judgment. "I'm just glad you broke out." With her, there was no need to explain the headlines. She demanded no dramatic retelling. We talked about design, about terrible movies, about the alarming speed at which we were finding gray hairs. It was mundane and magnificent. Then there was Dr. Lowe, the physician who had examined my bruises and spoken the truth about silence. Our relationship evolved from a professional one into something resembling mentorship. She introduced me to her network of advocates working with survivors of domestic abuse. I began to share my story in private, controlled settings, not for sympathy, but as a testament to the insidious nature of coercive control and the long road back to selfhood. Donating money through the foundation was one thing. Sitting in a circle of women, seeing my own past fears reflected in their eyes, and speaking words of hard-won hope was another. It was in those rooms, surrounded by raw courage, that I felt the final shards of my own shame dissolve. I had been a victim, yes, but I was not defined by it. I was defined by what I did after. Gavin observed this expansion of my world with a protectiveness that was slowly softening into pride. He would sometimes join Lorna and me for dinner, his imposing presence initially casting a slight chill over the table, until Lorna, utterly unintimidated, would rope him into a debate about the best Chicago deep dish pizza. I'd watch, a smile playing on my lips as my fierce, guarded brother was gradually, reluctantly humanized by the normalcy of shared meals and silly arguments. But the past, as we were learning, never truly leaves. It simply changes form. Its new manifestation arrived not with a threatening letter or a leaked photo, but in a plain manila envelope delivered by courier to the Vance headquarters. Inside was a single typed sheet of paper and a small, worn key taped to it. The message was succinct. The final ledger is in box 247, Northside Storage, 332 Lockwood Ave. Access paid through the year. He kept records of everything. You deserve to know it all. A friend. There was no signature, no return address. The paper was generic, the typing untraceable. My heart, which had learned to beat a steadier rhythm, began to drum a familiar, anxious tattoo. I called Gavin immediately. He was at my office within 20 minutes, his face set in that pre-storm calm I knew so well. He examined the envelope, the key, the note. "Could be a trap," he said, his voice low. "A way to draw you out. Or it could be someone from the inside, one of Montgomery's old associates looking to make amends, or cause more chaos." The storage facility was in a nondescript part of town, the kind of place that existed for secrets. "I have to go," I said, the words surprising me as much as him. "Ebony, no. Let me and Cyrus handle it." "And if it's a personal ledger, Gavin? If it has details about my mother, about the switch? This isn't about evidence for a trial anymore. This is about my history. I need to see it first." The defiance in my voice was new, born not from fear, but from a solidified sense of ownership. This was my story, my rubble to sift through. He stared at me for a long moment, then gave a single curt nod. "Then we go together, but on our terms." Our terms involved Cyrus scouting the location hours in advance, discreet cameras being set up, and Gavin and I arriving at the facility just as the sun began to dip below the skyline, casting long, cautious shadows. The unit was on the third floor of a climate-controlled building. The air smelled of dust and concrete. Box 247 was a standard 5x5 locker. Gavin positioned himself by the door, his gaze scanning the empty corridor, while I, with hands that only trembled slightly, fit the key into the lock. It turned with a smooth, well-oiled click. Inside was not a box, but a single, old-fashioned metal filing cabinet. I pulled open the top drawer. It was filled with neatly labeled folders, a lifetime of meticulous record-keeping by a man who trusted no one. I saw tabs with dates going back 40 years. My eyes scanned the labels. Vance Trust Amendments. Hospital records. E. Vance. Property deeds. Sterling family. Payments to J. Pike. West Horizon. Surveillance reports. G. and E. Wells. I pulled out the folder labeled Elara Vance. Inside were medical documents, but not just falsified ones. There were genuine doctor's notes, handwritten observations from the private facility. They described a woman not insane, but profoundly depressed, grieving a stolen child she could never name. There were notes about her asking for a girl named Ebony, a name my adoptive mother had chosen, a name that must have drifted to her through some clandestine whisper. She had known. She had remembered. A sob caught in my throat. Here was not just the clinical evidence of a crime, but the heartbreaking record of my mother's longing. Another folder, labeled The Switch, contained financial records, payments to a nurse, to an administrator at the adoption agency. It was a flowchart of corruption. Then, at the very back of the drawer was a thick, leather-bound journal. I lifted it out. This was no corporate ledger. This was Montgomery's father's personal diary. Gavin came to stand beside me as I opened it to a random page. The handwriting was sharp, arrogant. It detailed not just business dealings, but his contempt for his sworn brother, his obsessive desire for his brother's wife, his cold calculation in planning the accident. It spoke of the Vance problem and the elegant solution of the child. It was the naked, unrepentant voice of the architect of our misery. "This is it," Gavin whispered, his own voice thick with a complex emotion. This is the confession, not to a court, but to himself. He wasn't holding the journal, but his fists were clenched at his sides, as if physically restraining himself from reaching back through time. We took the journal and the Alara Vance file. We left the rest. The storage unit, with its cold, metallic smell of hidden sins, was relocked. The friend who had led us here remained a phantom, but their gift was the final, grim piece of the puzzle. It didn't change the outcome, but it deepened the roots of our understanding, adding shading to the black and white picture of good and evil we had constructed. The monster kept a diary. In it, he was petty, jealous, and pathologically self-justifying. He was not a grand demon, but a small man with a large capacity for evil. In a strange way, it was almost more frightening. That night, we sat in our loft with the journal on the coffee table between us, a sinister artifact. "What do we do with it?" I asked. The urge to burn it, to reduce it to ash, was powerful. Gavin was silent for a long time. "We keep it," he said finally, "not for vengeance, but for proof, so that no one ever can say it was a misunderstanding or a business dispute gone wrong. This is the map of a malignant heart. It belongs to the truth, no matter how ugly." And so we kept it, locked away in a safe of our own, a dark trophy from a war we had won. Its existence was a quiet acknowledgement that some wounds don't fully close. They become part of your topography, a canyon you learn to navigate. The knowledge it contained was heavy, but it no longer had the power to capsize me. I had built a vessel sturdy enough to carry it. Life, in its persistent way, kept flowing into the spaces we carved for it. A year after the storage unit, I stood at the helm of a new initiative within the Vance Company, the Alara Projects, focused on developing affordable, beautiful housing with on-site support services for families in transition, particularly those fleeing unsafe situations. The first groundbreaking was in a neighborhood I'd once driven through with Damon, who'd remarked it was beyond saving. As I lifted a ceremonial shovel of earth, I felt a surge of purpose that was entirely my own. I was not saving myself anymore. I was building something for others. Gavin, meanwhile, found an unexpected outlet for his protective instincts. He began volunteering his firm's expertise pro bono to a nonprofit that helped relocate and secure new identities for extreme domestic violence survivors, the ones for whom the system was not enough. He never spoke much about it, but sometimes I'd see him late at night studying architectural blueprints for a safe house with the same intensity he used to study surveillance reports. One crisp autumn evening, we hosted a small gathering in our loft. Lorna was there debating the merits of modern art with my uncle, Mr. Vance. Dr. Lowe was laughing at a story Cyrus was telling, the big man's usual sternness softened by good wine. The room was filled with a warm, easy noise, the sound of a life being lived, not defended. I stepped out onto the balcony for a moment of quiet, the city lights shimmering below like a field of fallen stars. Gavin joined me, handing me a glass of wine. We stood in companionable silence, looking at the world we had fought so hard to re-enter. "It's quieter than I expected," I said after a while. "The quiet after the storm is the best kind," he replied. "You can hear yourself think. You can hear what comes next." I leaned into him. "And what do you hear?" He looked down at me, and for the first time maybe in forever, I saw no shadow of the past in his eyes, only the reflection of the present lights and a flicker of a future, uncharted and open. I hear peace, Ebony. It sounds a lot like you. The story of the slap, the secret, the stolen heiress, and the vengeful brother was complete. Its final chapter wasn't an ending, but a gentle exhale. It was the sound of two people, their battles fought and their ghosts acknowledged, turning their faces from the receding storm clouds towards the vast, quiet, and promising horizon of an ordinary, extraordinary tomorrow. The script was ours now, and we were writing it in the language of quiet mornings, meaningful work, hard-won laughter, and the profound, unshakable peace of a fortress that had, finally, truly become a home. The quiet, as we discovered, was not an empty silence, but a fertile one. In the absence of sirens and subpoenas, subtler sounds emerged. The rhythm of our own breath, the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the distant laughter from a neighboring balcony, the soft click of Gavin's watch mechanism as he wound it each evening. We learned the grammar of peace. It had its own routines, its own small dramas, its own profound joys that were all the sweeter for their simplicity. My days were no longer segmented by panic or strategy sessions, but by the satisfying weight of a full inbox at the Vance offices, by site visits where the smell of fresh-cut lumber and the shouts of construction crews signaled creation, not destruction. The Alara projects broke ground on a second site and then a third. The work was grueling in its own way, budget meetings, zoning appeals, the endless dance of logistics, but the fatigue it brought was clean, earned, and left me feeling fulfilled, not hollowed out. Gavin's transformation was more internal, a slow shedding of an armor that had become fused to his skin. He still moved with a predator's grace, and his gaze could still turn assessing and cool in a heartbeat, but the constant low-grade tension that had vibrated around him like a force field began to dissipate. He took up sailing on Lake Michigan, a sport that demanded patience and a respect for forces greater than himself. He claimed it was for the silence, but I saw how it forced his relentless mind to focus on wind, water, and horizon, elements that could not be intimidated or outmaneuvered, only understood and respected. He'd return from these outings smelling of fresh air and brine, his hands roughened by rope, a calmness in his eyes that no therapist's couch could have provided. Our relationship, the bedrock that had withstood every shockwave, evolved into something softer, yet stronger. We were no longer just protector and protected, or co-conspirators in a war for truth. We became flatmates, confidants, and the family we had always chosen for each other, now living in the daylight of that choice. We bickered over whose turn it was to buy coffee, debated movies with ridiculous fervor, and developed a silent language of looks and gestures born from a shared history too complex for words. He was my first call with good news, my silent presence during a bad day. I was the one who dragged him to dreadful modern art galleries with Lorna, and the one who knew when to leave him alone with his boat schematics and his thoughts. The past, of course, was not erased. It lived in the foundation we'd built upon. The leather-bound journal remained in the safe, a dormant volcano of truth. We never opened it again, but its presence was a monument, a stone marking the burial site of a lie so large it had shaped continents of our lives. Sometimes, on the anniversary of the slap at the Skyline Terrace, or on the date the police report listed for my mother Alara's passing, a somberness would settle over us. We didn't perform grief for each other, we simply acknowledged its shadow passing through the room. Gavin might pour 2 fingers of an expensive scotch, setting one glass aside untouched. I might light a sandalwood candle, the scent my adoptive mother had loved. We'd sit in the quiet, not needing to speak, honoring the ghosts without letting them haunt the present. It was during this period of quiet construction that a new, gentle thread began to weave itself into the fabric of our lives. His name was Leo, and he entered not with a dramatic flourish, but through the practical, unsexy world of municipal government. He was the city planner assigned as the liaison for the third Alara project. Our first meeting was in a sterile conference room, a discussion of drainage permits and community impact assessments. He was in his late 40s, with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners and a calm, methodical way of speaking that prioritized facts over bluster. He was unimpressed by the Vance name and clearly unfamiliar with the tabloid saga. He was interested in soil stability reports and pedestrian access. I found it refreshing. Over weeks of necessary meetings, a professional respect blossomed. He was a widower, I learned casually. His wife lost to illness years before. He spoke of her with a quiet fondness that held no bitterness, and he spoke of his teenage daughter Maya with a pride that was both fierce and tender. There was no courtship, no grand romance. It was a slow dawning of compatibility. A shared working lunch extended into a conversation about favorite books. He admired the social intent behind my projects, not just the architecture. He listened, truly listened, when I spoke about the challenges of balancing profitability with purpose. When I first mentioned him to Gavin over dinner of takeout Thai food, I did so carefully, watching his face. My brother set his chopsticks down, his expression inscrutable. "A city planner," he repeated, his tone neutral. "He's a good man," I said, a defensive note creeping in that I immediately hated. Gavin was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on a distant point. I braced for the protective interrogation, the subtle threat assessment, the unspoken reminder of the last man I'd chosen. But then he looked at me, and I saw not suspicion, but a profound and painful consideration. "Do you trust him?" he asked, the question simple and heavy. I think I'm starting to," I replied, honesty being the only currency between us. He nodded slowly. "Then I'll trust your judgment." He picked up his chopsticks again, poking at a piece of broccoli. "But if he ever makes you cry, I'll have to explain city planning regulations to him in great detail, from the bottom of the Chicago River." It was a threat, but it was also a blessing. It was Gavin's way of saying the fortress gates were open, that I could now choose my company wisely, and that his role was no longer to keep everyone out, but to ensure those I let in deserved the privilege. Leo, understandably, was wary of Gavin at first. Who wouldn't be? But Gavin, to my endless surprise, made an effort. He didn't try to be friendly, that would have been a terrifying sight, but he was civil. He asked Leo technical questions about urban development that showed genuine interest, and he listened to the answers. One Sunday, Leo brought his daughter Maya over to help us assemble a preposterously complicated piece of Scandinavian furniture. Maya, a sharp-witted 16-year-old with her father's calm eyes, was utterly unintimidated by Gavin. She asked him bluntly what his security firm actually secured, and he, after a beat of stunned silence, gave her a straightforward answer about data encryption protocols, which she then proceeded to question with startling insight. I watched from the kitchen, a lump in my throat, as these disparate pieces of my life, the scarred brother, the gentle planner, the clever teenager, interacted not as figures from different genres of story, but as people in a shared, ordinary moment, puzzling over an Allen key and a badly translated instruction manual. This was the new narrative, not one of uncovering secrets, but of building connections. It was messier, less clearly plotted. There were misunderstandings with Leo, moments where my past trauma would flare up at an unexpected tone or a raised hand, and he would have to learn my triggers as I learned to communicate them. There were challenges with Maya, who was navigating her own grief and adolescent angst, and who viewed me with a teenager's perfectly balanced blend of curiosity and skepticism. There were times I'd catch Gavin watching us all, a lonely figure on the periphery of this nascent family unit, and my heart would ache for him. But he was building his own connections too. He'd found a community among the sailors at the marina, men and women who knew him only as the quiet, capable guy with the well-maintained sloop. The final, subtle shift in our story came not from an external threat, but from an internal realization. It happened on a weekend trip to a quiet lakeside cabin Leo owned. Gavin had come along, ostensibly to fish. On our last evening, we built a fire in a stone pit by the water's edge. Maya was sketching in a notebook, Leo was poking the logs, and Gavin and I sat in companionable silence, watching the flames dance against the deepening twilight. The conversation drifted, as it does by firesides, to memories. Leo spoke of his wife's terrible, wonderful habit of singing off-key in the car. Maya shared a funny story about her mom trying to assemble a barbecue. The space opened, naturally, for others. I felt Gavin tense beside me. Speaking of the past, our past, in this casual, tender context, was uncharted territory. But then, in a voice so quiet it was almost swallowed by the crackle of the fire, he began to speak. Not of the accident, or the conspiracy, or the violence. He spoke of our mother, his mother, my adoptive mother, and her legendary, disastrous attempts at baking. He described the tiny kitchen in our group home, filled with smoke and her laughter, the charcoal hockey pucks she'd present as cookies. She'd say, "The love is in the attempt, not the execution," Gavin said, a faint, real smile touching his lips. It was a small, sun-dappled memory from the time before the storm. He had shielded those memories for so long, protecting them from the contamination of what came after. By sharing this one, he was not just offering it to me, but to Leo and Maya. He was integrating the broken halves of his history, allowing the good to exist alongside the terrible. I reached over and took his hand, his large, calloused fingers closing around mine. No words were needed. Maya looked up from her sketching, her young face thoughtful in the firelight. Leo met my gaze and gave a slow, understanding nod. We drove back to the city the next day, the car filled with a comfortable silence. As the skyline emerged on the horizon, a familiar silhouette of power and memory, I felt not the old knot of anxiety, but a sense of ownership. The city had been the stage for my humiliation, my persecution, and my vindication. Now it was simply the backdrop for my life, a life that contained complex work, a gentle love, a found family, and a brother whose peace was finally as deep and real as his fury had once been. The story that began with a slap in a ballroom, echoing with cruelty, had found its resolution not in a courtroom verdict or a dramatic confrontation, but here, in the quiet continuum of days. It ended with the understanding that a life reclaimed is not a life frozen in the moment of victory. It is a life that grows, that risks new connections, that remembers the past without being chained to it, and that finds its most profound strength not in surviving the storm, but in cultivating the garden that grows in the soil the storm left behind. The last line of our old story had been written. Now we were busy writing the first lines of countless new ones, together and apart, in the blessed, ordinary, beautiful quiet.